and consecutive crises we have faced over the past 15 years from worsening. We have all observed the waning on a global scale of rules-based order and the liberal model of governance, and the weakening of the West and the model that prevailed after World War II, in combination with the emergence of powers who question the order of things, or at least aspects of that order, and those issues are shaping a new reality. At the same time, supranational organizations, and the UN in particular, are dysfunctional, failing to avert crises and conflicts, but intervening afterwards and doing great work in terms of humanitarian aid, but this is not enough. So do we need a new global model of governance? Are new mechanisms required, and in what framework? Do we want greater representation for a world that has changed dramatically since 1945? Are the rules outdated? Do we need to rewrite them? We have two very experienced politicians with us, former prime ministers, with whom we will try to answer these questions. And we will also talk about the Summit of the Future and the initiatives of the Club de Madrid. The 2024 Summit of the Future, to be held in September, presents a pivotal opportunity to improve global governance and unify global efforts to shape a brighter, shared future for humanity. Our panelists will discuss the fundamental purposes of the global governance system and the critical gaps that exist today, particularly those hindering the achievement of the Agenda 2030 goals. The focus will be on identifying pressing issues that need to be addressed in the three main outputs expected of the forthcoming summit: the proposed pact for the future, a declaration for future generations, and a global digital compact. So with no further ado, I would like to raise the first question to Stefan Löfven, who is a Club de Madrid member and former Prime Minister of Sweden. The Summit of the Future is an attempt to breathe new life into global cooperation against a backdrop of widespread turbulence and crisis, as described in my introduction. So we'd like to hear your assessment of the current state of international affairs.
First, thank you so much for this possibility, and it's an honor and pleasure to sit here with George Pαπandreou. Well, you mentioned yourself all the problems, many of the problems rather that we have in the world, and we need to deal with them together, but we're not doing that. So we have too much of nationalism, regionalism, and short-sightedness. So that's, in a nutshell, I would say, one way of describing it. Now, to put it in context, this summit came out from, first, there was a discussion during the 75th anniversary of the United Nations where member states themselves said, we are doing too little and we're doing it too slow. Look at the climate, look at all the crisis, conflicts that we have, and hunger, poverty, child labor. We have 170 million people in the world lacking electricity to their households. Sorry, we have 700 million. Sorry, I was wrong. We have 170 million children exposed to labor, child labor. Now, I'm pointing out this that it was a member state society, because when we talk about the multilateral system, in this case specifically United Nations, we say United Nations is not doing enough and is doing the... Well, it is the member states. It's always the members in an organizations that are ultimate responsible. The conflicts that we see, we saw, a long time when conflicts weren't handled properly in the Security Council. And things were vetoed, and it still goes on. So there's something wrong with that. Now, after this pledge from the member states, they also asked the Secretary General, can you please come back with a report on this issue? And he did, one with the title, Our Common Agenda. And to put it very short, what he wrote there was, we are at the crossroad in the world now. Either it's a breakthrough or it's a breakdown. That was his message. And then he asked me and Madam Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, former president of Liberia, to co-chair a high-level advisory board. And he said to us, please come up with concrete proposals, not on what we should do. We know that. We have the SDGs, we have the Paris Agreement, we have Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and so on. So we know what we want to do, but how do we do this better? Please be concrete. So we spent the whole process a year on repeating the question, how? Okay, how? So this summit now is supposed to decide upon a pact for the future. Mm-hmm. So the member states, it's the General Assembly sitting down, discussing, they are already negotiating, a pact for the future with the purpose of course, developing, improving the multilateral system. That's the picture of it. And I can come back, in our panel, in our board, we came up with 6 what we call transformative shifts, because we don't need just detailed changes now. We need transformative shifts. But I can get back to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Papandreou, how do you see these dynamics shaping global cooperation and governance? I mean, the aforementioned dynamics of the international system.
Well, let me also welcome Stefan here, a great colleague, and congratulations on the work you have done for this multilateral future that we want. And as we are both a little bit, you're Swedish, I'm Swedish also in many ways. As a refugee in Sweden, I wanted to pay tribute to Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the first General Secretary of the United Nations, a Swede. And he talked about many things, but one of it was the moral foundation of international diplomacy. And I think we need to get back to the idea of the moral foundations, the ethical foundations of our globe, our international community. And what I think we need when we talk about ethical foundations, we're talking about the rules, the principles, the values, the limits also that we have in our behavior, the capacity we have. And today we have, I think, a huge power as humanity, amazing powers, whether it's financial, whether it's knowledge, whether it's AI, whether it's in weapons. And the question is there going to be hubris, to use an ancient Greek word? Is it going to be arrogance? Are we going to use this power just to kill ourselves, as you say, break down, because that's where we'll end with weapons of mass destruction? Or are we going to use it for the good? And I think going back again to ancient Greece, Aristotle put the question, what is the good life? Well, what is a good planet? I think we need to ask, what kind of a society in this future summit do we want to create? And of course, can we come together on this? And that's the difficulty. But don't forget, the United Nations, when it was created, actually was based on the Universal Charter for Human Rights. So there is a basis, a moral basis, a principle basis, which at that time all countries, all member states did agree upon. Can we do this again with the new challenges? And there are many. But one would expect climate change, weapons of mass destruction, big data and artificial intelligence, mass migration and refugees, biodiversity, scarcity of water, food security, the issues of huge inequalities. You mentioned poverty, but the deep inequalities which also create a concentration of wealth, which then comes as power and sometimes even captures our democratic institutions through media and football teams and corruption and so on. How do we deal with these in common? Are these issues going to unite us, or are they going to divide us? I think this is a big question. So I would want to talk about, I want to see it, this is maybe a plea that we need, and this is what you started with, Stefan, when you said, can we do this together? That's the big question. And this is where I think we all need to put our efforts, our dynamic, our force, our political force, our voices is, can we do this together? And what is stopping us from doing this together? And I can get a little bit into some of the things. I think maybe just one point on this. With the end of the Cold War, the US was dominant. I would say still is quite dominant, but it was completely dominant. We had a unipolar world. And I think then we missed an opportunity, and the US missed an opportunity. It was too much this feeling that, this is the end of history. We've done it, everything's fine. It will only be a paradise from now on. And we did not see that there were many problems in the world, which now have risen up in many ways and forms. I think that that time, the US could have brought in, more easily than today, with Europe, but with China, with Russia, with Global South, as we use that term, to create new structures of multilateralism which would function for a future. That didn't happen. Unluckily, the US got embroiled in adventurous wars with terrible consequences, whether it's Iraq, whether it was Libya, whether it was Afghanistan, but also we see the consequences of this even now in the Middle East and around the world, and many other issues, of course, that were not resolved. And now we have this global competition. I still think we can do it, and that is what our hope is. And it does need a coalition of the willing, and I think the US has to be part of it. It also depends on who's going to be elected in November. Europe can play a major part, but we need to bring in other forces around the world to rethink the United Nations, feel that we are including the different groups. It is true on the Security Council or in the financial structures, in the IMF, the World Bank. There are many parts of the world which are underrepresented, even though they may have the largest populations in the world. So I think these are the issues that we're facing. These are the dilemmas.
Great. Well, actually, you're giving a coalition of the willing a positive connotation, because last time we heard about coalition of the willing was military, exactly, and US's intervention in Iraq, exactly. So, Mr. Löfven, what do you see as the greatest challenge or greatest challenges to multilateralism and global cooperation today?
I think that I touched upon it in my first intervention. I think a challenge for politicians today is that first you have to have the answer right here and now. If a question, a problem occurs, you must be able to answer it here and now. And that's rarely possible, but you have to act. The other thing that has been, with the right-wing extremists growing, been more of inward looking in politics. So it's us. You hear it everywhere. It's making America great again, or produce that in India or China and Europe and whatever. So we're looking at ourselves and looking to the constituencies saying, look, I'm taking care of you because I'm really taking care of our country. Whether it should be the opposite, that the best way of providing the citizens a good life and good future and the children is to cooperate with others. There is a term called collective security. It was launched in a report that actually one of my predecessors, Olof Palme, came up with 40 plus years ago now. And the core of collective security, that term is that if my neighbors feel safe, I am safe. If my neighbors feel insecure, unsafe, I'm also more insecure. And that's logic. So it means that there is an incentive for all countries, should be an incentive for all political leaders to say, I'm trying my best to reach out to the neighborhood, but also to the world, because that's the best way that we can develop our country and our society. So that is something I think we should change that way of thinking, and we should push for it more.
Good. Mr. Papandreou, let me get back to the Pact for the Future, which will focus on reaffirming the fundamental principles and values of the UN at a time when violations of these principles, as already discussed, by key actors are increasingly evident. So, how do you propose these contradictions can be managed in order to strengthen the integrity and effectiveness of international cooperation?
Well, I would just add or agree with what Stefan said earlier. You know, I'll give you an example. When I was Prime Minister and we were hit by the financial crisis, there was this term, too big to fail. But actually, it was too big to control. It was...
The crisis, not Greece.
The crisis, yes. And the system. There was this system, nobody knew really where it was going to come from. It was a very opaque, we weren't really sure where it was going to hit us from, where it was going to whack us from, you know, where it was going to come from, what we should do about it. And that sense of powerlessness, I think, has created great insecurity. And that's just one of the crises. I mean, we've gone through many. But I think that the reaction to these crises is, and the previous panel was talking about this, how do we rethink the power structures at the global level? It's not easy because people who have power or institutions or whatever countries that have a lot of power will not want to give it up. But how do we restructure power structures so that they are more transparent, more controllable, more delivering, as we were saying, what people want? And if we don't do this, we will get what Stefan was saying. You know, when you're hit by a storm or insecurity, what's your knee-jerk reaction? Let's go back home. Let's close the doors. Let's close the windows. Let's hide. Well, that's what Brexit was.
And adopt stereotypes, if I may.
Yes. Yes. Of course. It's and Brexit was the Brexiteers had this very smart slogan: "Take back control." But you cannot take back control alone. And that's the thing. We need to take back control working together. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was talking with some secretary of the Trump administration in one of these similar forums in New York, and he was talking about making America great again, I was saying, well, America will not be great again if it goes alone. The better for the American people is to work with other societies, other peoples around the world, to deal with the big issues like climate change or unemployment or inequalities and so on. So this idea that we can, at a national level, and, you know, we, the strong Greeks or the strong, you know, Hungarians or the strong Turks, you know, or the strong Indians, we are going to be dealing with this issue and, you know, kick out these migrants or these terrible, I don't know, foreigners or Chinese or whatever, Americans. That is not going to work, very simply. So we need, as the previous panel was talking about, a new narrative, which is basically a new meaning to some of these terms, which explains what I think is very logical, what Olof Palme said. If your neighbor is secure, you're secure. I wish they would understand that in the Middle East, the Israelis and Palestinians.
Mr. Löfven, how can we curb populism in such challenging times? And Sweden has not been an exception to this rule.
No, it's a democracy need to deliver, and it's the same thing. So the headline of this part is to deliver, and let me share a few proposals that we had for the multilateral system to be able to deliver. It takes not only, I mean, it's not UN, the headquarters in New York. It's the UN system, it's the member states, it's regional organizations, it's enterprises, it's civil society. We need to do this together. A couple of proposals that we made, and I also want to say we were not the only process before this summit. There's one specifically on digitalization, there's one specifically on peace agenda and so on. So I think it was total 9, 10 different processes leading up to this summit. We propose on inclusion, first major shift that we propose is include more people in the multilateral thinking. Two ways of doing that is first, gender equality. let's make sure that the whole world, we work together to make sure that we use the 100% of our potential, not just 50%. Bring in youth more systematically. And there's already now a youth office in the UN headquarters to make sure that the youth voices are heard more. On climate, we need a pact specifically on climate. It's time for the member states to say we must phase out fossil fuels. We have no choice. We must decide when we have zero emission, net emission, because I'm really confused by the debate that is. It's as if this climate transition. What we need to do is just someone came up with something. Okay, let's do that. We can, but we don't have to. Because it's going to be complicated, it's going to be expensive for people. And I do understand the problem with gas prices and all that. But the other cost, if we don't do that, it's much, much higher. Much higher. Because if we reach 2-3 degrees warming, well, then we'll have problems with food production. As one example, that's one small example. So we have to make, that's very clear. Do that pact, phase out fossil fuel, make sure that we decide on net zero emission. A third one is the financial system. The world doesn't have, we have enough resources. If you count the richest people in the world, do that. You will find it very interesting. Because when you come to number 6, you add 6 people, the 6 wealthiest people, they own together $1 trillion. $1,000 billion. So and I'm not saying we're going to rob them, but I'm saying this because we can tax them. Exactly. That's one of our proposals. We need to find a better way of coordinating our tax system so we actually tax them. But my point is that we have resources enough. Now let's show that we can de-risk for investment, use the IMF, use the World Bank, the private sector and others, and invest much, much more. And the richer part of the world, we have a huge responsibility. And we have done too little. We're worried about the Chinese investment in Africa. Well, I can also see the problems, the challenges, yes. But the question is, why weren't we there before? Why didn't we invest? Africa is a continent that will grow this century. Most of everybody. There's a huge potential in Africa. And if we only can see that if investing means that people can get into jobs, that will be good for them, for the countries, but also for the world, because they will contribute in the economy. That's why Lula proposed and implemented the Bolsa de Familia. He knew that the poorest people will not put the money in the bank account. They will consume because they have to consume food, clothes, whatever. So that's a way of growing economy for us all. And then on peace, I'll end there. I can't go through everybody, but all the proposals. But on peace, 2 things. One is collective security. The other thing we're saying is it's time to phase out nuclear weapons. And I understand it's not easy to say that now in these days, but it should be easier because now we see the risk. The climate problem, if we don't do anything about it, we'll have huge problems in the world. The nuclear weapons, they're here and now. Every hour, every breath we take, there's a risk of nuclear weapons being used. We don't know that. And we have some 2,000, 2,500 directly there already ready to go if needed. And we call it mutual assured destruction. That is a term. So our security is built on the fact that we can destroy one another.
That's why the acronym is MAD.
MAD.
It's MAD, exactly. So we propose change from MAD to mutually assured survival. That's another way of thinking. And I think it's much, much better. So I'm doing a little commercial for that one now. Sorry. No, but I mean, that's also a way of thinking. How can we even believe that's a security, just because I know I can destroy you as well. If you destroy me, I destroy you. Well, that's, and after that, okay, was that a good idea? No, it wasn't. So,
not very wise.
Sorry?
Not very wise.
It's not very wise. So yeah, those were a few of the things that I think we need to address. And let me also say that I am a bit worried that too few leaders around the world is really engaged in this summit, preparing for the summit. They need to know what's going on. They need to know the proposals. They need to instruct the representatives in the UN and say, this is the outcome we want. So please, everybody, help out and make sure that we can have a good outcome on that summit.
Okay, good luck. Mr. Παπανδρέου, it is clear that there is a degree of paralysis caused by certain member states using the system to protect national interests. Let's say the P5, for instance, the permanent five at the UN. But there are also strong grievances between North and South that make negotiations difficult. Do you think there is a way to curb such situations and ensure that the UN can work effectively for the common global good?
I believe that we need to create more global movements and more awareness of citizens around the world. And so if leaders are reluctant to work together, let's see if we can mobilize more difficult youth movements, women's movements, labor movements, migrants, people who are disenfranchised but are looking for a change. Can we do this around the world? Well, Stefan was mentioning nuclear weapons, and I absolutely agree. This is madness. When the Cold War was over, we had a sense, and there were some new treaties and denuclearization and so on. We had a sense, okay, the nuclear threat is behind us. It's not. It's actually even worse because the nuclear weapons have proliferated. But I remember also Olof Palme, with my father Andreas Papandreou, and 4 other leaders around the world, they took the initiative of 6 to go around the world, mobilize from intellectuals, Nobel Peace Prize. I remember Marquez sitting next to me, 100 days of solitude, sitting next to me, to citizens around the world fighting against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We need to, again, inspire these types of movements. Nuclear is one, and of course there are many others, such as climate, and there have been some movements, and of course a very well-known Swedish woman who's been fighting for climate. But I would also say that, secondly, there are resources. Now I say this, and some people will laugh in the group of some of the Greeks, because I've always said money does exist. Just where is it, and who has it? It's huge inequalities. How do we actually use the resources for an equitable society? We both are social democrats, and Stefan comes from a country which has a long tradition and has basically been a model for social democracy. What social democracy did was it humanized capitalism. It humanized capitalism. Now we're challenged to humanize globalization at a global level. And this is where, on the one hand, we need to see democracies deliver, that is, deliver what citizens want. But I go back to the previous panel too. It's not just delivering, but it's also engaging our citizens in a way so they also have agency in these changes. I say that because sometimes, when we deal with crises, again, and I've seen many leaders around the world, and I've been a prime minister and I've been minister, sometimes the first reaction is, oh, let's go back to normal. Your leaders there, we've got the pandemic. Oh, let's go back to how it was before. However, how it was before was what brought the pandemic. So actually, you don't want to go back to how it was before. You want to use this crisis for change. But that's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. Okay, I'll do it. I'll deliver, and maybe we find a technocratic solution, you know, some new technology, some new application, and we'll solve everything. It doesn't work that way. Then there's another reaction of leaders too. You have a crisis, you actually create more fear, and you say, I am the savior. And that's the Trump way, you know? I'm the savior, you vote for me, I will save everything. And it ends up with polarizing society and making society incapable of change. I think there's a third way, and that is engaging citizens, bringing people on board, where we say, you know, these things are complex. We do have solutions, but we're not sure. These are major choices. Maybe you have an opinion. Maybe you have a new idea. Actually, maybe you have the knowledge. Collectively, we have the knowledge to make the changes, because these issues, let's take in climate change, the changes in our life, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in energy, whether it's in food production, whether it's in how we build cities, whether it's in you know, our consumption patterns, they will be major changes. We cannot do this simply by having a nice plan and imposing it upon our citizens. We have to have our citizens involved. So I think, on the one hand, we need to deliver, but delivering also means rethinking our democracies to really get citizen engagement in this transition to a different world.
Especially engage the young generation.
And particularly the young generation.
I can see the gentleman with the sign end. This is the end of our panel, not the end of the world. Okay, and let's hope that we will avoid further fragmentation. And between, if I may, between breakthrough and breakdown, there is no dilemma. The answer is obvious. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to both.
Welcome to this new session on South versus North. Can the G7 be a real bridge? Let me briefly introduce our guest. Finally, I meet also the last the last guest. So, Daniel Gross on my left, director of the Institute for European Policymaker at the Bocconi University. Abla Abdellatif, executive director and director of research at the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, EGES, in Egypt.